This is a series on optimizing Hatsu for each Nen category, which is important in Hunter x Hunter because characters design their own abilities and can limit their potential if they don't understand what their Nen actually does or the most efficient way they could cause the effect they want. We're starting with Enhancement in celebration of Finks being added to Nen Impact. And there's a trick almost all enhancers seem to use to boost their power, whether or not they realize they're using it. Because for most cases, given how straightforward their categories' applications are, enhancers don't need to think about how their Hatsu work. They can just concentrate on applying their aura with more intensity and emphasis on enhancement, and find that their Hatsu effect is automatically being mixed in. But if you want more precision, you want a different kind of ability, or you want to make the most of adding conditions to your Nen, it would be good to go over what exactly enhancers are doing when they're making their attacks stronger. It seems straightforward at first because they enhance, so they improve things. But aura is already energy, so you're not making more aura, you're not increasing your amount, because that would be like plugging a power strip into itself for infinite electricity. While in the long term, any category can train to improve the amount of aura they have over time. And while the category normally amplifies physical things to make them more effective, anyone can already use aura to boost their body's offensive power. So what is it that makes Uvogin's Big Bang Impact stronger than a punch with Ko? He's not just better at spending his aura as fuel, because if enhancers were only better at applying more of the energy they have to convert into power, they wouldn't be known as generally stronger, or pointed out to be the most balanced like they are. They'd be glass cannons, because they would have a trade-off where they'd be spending their stamina quicker and sacrificing their defense for immediate damage. And while Gon does do that, it's a specific use of enhancement for when he needs more strength than he sustainably has, and it does make him vulnerable, so it's not the backbone of how enhancers amplify their power. It's a workaround to fight stronger opponents that has limits, which he only relies on because he hasn't fully developed his Nen. So what is the fundamental way enhancement boosts people's power? What would spending some of your aura to enhance your Ko actually be doing to make your Ko so much more practical than in other categories? To make everything simpler, we might as well clarify what the thought behind Nen as a concept seems to be. Because a lot of what I've said in videos is kind of convoluted, since so far, I've been trying to describe implications of the power system without ever clarifying what the premise is, and that makes discussions about Nen complicated. Also, any specific fact we're told or we assume about the intricacies of a fictional world or its power system could turn out to be false or expand in a different direction later on. So all we know we can really generally follow is the broader thinking of the writer behind it. I think showing a potential explanation for the thought process behind designing Nen will make the ways it works and is shown in the story seem a lot simpler and straightforward. We can get into the inspirations in another video, if there is interest in that, but to simplify what the idea behind Nen seems to be. Nen is a way of improving your power and your potential through effort and repeatable practice, no matter who you are. It's a simple mechanism that lets characters in Hunter x Hunter do this in a more obvious way that's easier for the audience to follow. But Nen isn't magic. It follows consistent logical rules and is tied to the rest of the natural world as more of a basic mechanic of the universe. The word magic is specifically what Civilization labels it as to trick regular people, so they never see what the actual exploitable source is behind all sorts of tricks and talents and organic abilities of different animals, because it would be dangerous if any common person had the knowledge to acquire the available means around them to dismantle everything if they ever fell through enough cracks, which trillions of beings and billions of humans do all the time as their lives come to an end and are replaced by the next generation. Knowledge is power, but that's why it has to be regulated, because power is dangerous in the hands of someone with nothing left to lose. Powerful people who find the rest of the world at odds with them can become big problems. And some of the scariest problems are people who are willing to sacrifice their own well-being for something they're obsessed with, because they can use mechanisms the rest of the world can't afford to. So the actual fundamental way to rationalize the world and see the invisible causes behind things is hidden to ordinary humans. But because anyone can figure it out, and civilization does need some people capable of using whatever hidden mental trick lets anyone break through limits and status quos, in order to accomplish anything, there's a test people can take to prove they're capable and useful and consistent enough to be worthy of competitive advantages. And then, when they're considered rare enough and worth it, it effectively puts them in a special category above ordinary humans, where they generally won't step on each other's or wider civilization's toes. Or at least that's how everyone has to hope it works, because that system is the best chance to try to keep everything in check. And that's how Hunter x Hunter's world is set up with its Hunters Association. But nature, the world at its core, takes sources of power and builds on them. Aura has been integrated into natural selection, boosting the power of creatures relative to the sizes of their bodies to the point that an ecosystem of giant aura-using monsters is a hellscape on the level of the insect kingdom. And now, modern developments to technology like computers and the internet are starting to be integrated into game-changing special abilities. The human world is only able to exist because it's a small pocket of space hidden from the aura-integrated ecosystem around it. And it's only maintained by some of those aura-integrated creatures acting as guardians, because they want it to exist for whatever reason. Maybe because they're raising something in there, maybe because it's a vacation spot, or maybe because, by isolating an ecosystem from aura, it's restricted and stable enough so they can watch as its inhabitants develop all sorts of different strengths, like modern technology and analytical theory, that those guardians could someday use for themselves. Like how Earth was a giant computer in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Hunter x Hunter is about the circle of life, and that means being one with nature, where the message is that the human way of rationalizing things is meant to be a placeholder we do to flatten down the infinitely complex and indescribable reality around us, so we can follow it and keep up with changes to our circumstances. And Nen is supposed to show how if we remain self-aware about how our rationale is a flattened down placeholder, so we use it to temporarily guide us in the moment, but then course correct and adjust our rationale for the next moment, we can grow stronger, expand our influence, and use our actions to target changes around mental walls. While anyone who doesn't do this just asymptotically approaches but can never break through an invisible wall, capping their potential, no matter how much they train to master a specific rationalized model, like a skill or some theory. So Nen types can be broken down into basic mental applications of a raw source of energy, which isn't magic, because in reality, once you have this one trick to the way you see things, you end up crossing this threshold where, in effect, the whole world starts looking completely different. But your way of seeing everything lets you actually cause effects and chain reactions, whereas everyone else is simply on a lower level of being affected by things without spotting how. 3 out of the 4 main characters lean toward Enhancer, a type of person that doesn't even need to rationalize and anchor a specific ability premise in their head, which is tied to a personality trait where they can act without having to really rationalize things. While the last of the 4 main characters leans toward Specialist, cautionary tales who need to rationalize things in order to function, instead of being able to just act and then course correct, whose potentials are limited because they can't keep up with the ever-changing world around them, so they just become finite points that are left behind as the world moves forward, and their rationale drifts further and further from accurate reality until they end up making enemies with the rest of humanity, bleeding all their potential and meeting their end. Normally, you can't use specialization unless you're fully a specialist. But because Kurapika is already at the fence because he's willing to throw his life away for vengeance, and he has unique eyes tied to his intense negative emotional state that boost his aura, he has a unique opportunity where he's not naturally a specialist, but if he forces his eyes to remain active, he can anchor the changes to his thought process and his aura from his emotional state, which locks in this negative drive and switches what side of the fence he's on. So he's throwing his potential away, and it will eventually be the end of him, unless he goes through some change of heart, which might happen at some point because all the 4 main characters have personal challenges that fit the theme of the Circle of Life, and so far 3 of them have worked through theirs. But then again, Kurapika's on the other side of the chart where cautionary tales go, so it might not work out as nicely for him. Anyway, to line up with their opposite approaches, Enhancement is designed around concentrating potential to use one thing more effectively in all sorts of scenarios, whereas Specialization is designed around bleeding potential to use all sorts of things for one specific purpose. Enhancement lets someone spend their aura like training wheels to lock onto some kind of circuit or flow of chain reactions of behavior and expend their energy through that system in a way that doesn't interfere with its functionality. The result is that since the system is running, but with more energy and intensity, its effect is amplified. And Specialization lets someone spend their aura to split it around something and kickstart their own adjacent circuits or flows. The result is that they're able to connect and create some wider functionality using all of them. So, for an example of Enhancement, it's like how Palm Siberia takes advantage of how a crystal ball can bend a lot of light to capture more of the nearby space inside of it, so with a bit of emission and transmutation to adjust what it's aiming at, and some kind of animated statue to center and stabilize the effect, she can seemingly amplify the crystal ball's scenery capturing ability to locate and look at anything she wants. Kurapika seems to use Enhancement to boost his subconscious perceptiveness, to make all sorts of deductions he normally couldn't, and Dogman boosts his sense of smell to tell all sorts of information about the people around him. Enhancement is super fun because you can design feasible abilities like you're solving a puzzle by looking for existing systems that would provide the most benefits from their natural functionality if you just boosted their intensity and strength. And you can just connect multiple available systems to piece together custom functionality if you want. What makes these abilities feasible is that Enhancement works like training wheels, which also explains how it's considered the most balanced category, or the easiest to use in a universal way, because it naturally finds ways to be applied without disrupting a system, so you can easily apply it to how you already use Nen. That's why enhancers just have to train to then use its raw effect like a muscle, and then they can freely draw more aura from their inner reserves and dump it all into one part of their body to apply it where they need to. It isn't as efficient for any other category because all of their effects involve sidestepping the functionality of the system they're applied to in some way. But most importantly, this also gives us an answer to where Enhancement's biggest physical strength buff comes from. If the premise of Enhancement is that it concentrates resources into the process of a system to increase that system's effect, like concentrating force to increase power, then the big natural trick enhancers use to boost their power would be amplifying their concentration. You know how needles that would pierce you on their own become harmless if you stand on a bed of them at once because you're spreading the force? What if the opposite happens, and the piercing power of 1,000 needles is concentrated into one supernaturally sharp and stabby needle? That would be the principle Enhancement uses to boost someone's strength. When we see an enhancer really master strength improvement, it looks like they're straining and tightening their aura into thinner and thinner lines, and condensing it into smaller and smaller spaces for an impact with the biggest chain reaction. And it also explains how Finks' Hatsu is viable. He doesn't have to worry as much about quicker aura loss with the more spins he makes, because what each turn of his arm could be hooked up to is just the tightening of the amount of aura coming from it in order to increase the punch's power. So any additional aura he does add would make it exponentially more effective. At least, that's how the category seems to line up. So if you're making a Hatsu for Enhancement, I think it could be helpful to keep this idea in mind.